presentation be mostly about? 오늘 발표 주제에 대해서 간단히 설명해 주세요.
So my presentation today is going to talk about something a little bit more focused on the real world applications of blockchain and of cryptocurrencies. And my focus will be on sharing economies and how cryptocurrency and the token economics that come with cryptocurrencies helps to facilitate a new kind of sharing economy.
Okay. 그럼 큰 박수로 청해 들어보겠습니다.
Great, so the title, of course, of the presentation is A New World of Sharing Economies and Utilizing Token Economics. So what is the sharing economy? The first thing that comes to mind are ride-hailing services such as Uber, Lyft, perhaps Didi in China. Also brings to mind the ability to rent for a short-term rental somebody else's house or apartment, and that's Airbnb, of course. And the ability to also share working space. WeWork is a prime example of this, where people can come together in a shared office space, oftentimes with shared ideals and a very entrepreneurial mindset, and not have to take up the entire office. So I think by now, nearly every single product or service out there has had some sort of sharing economy built around it, and this is an interesting one in China. There's an umbrella sharing economy, and nonetheless, and goes to show that people really are interested in sharing economies nowadays and trying to figure out good ways to scale that successfully. But what exactly is a sharing economy? Can we define it a little bit more clearly? And what we've done is to highlight 6 different characteristics of sharing economies, and this includes an on-demand nature, being able to access goods or services when you want it, when you need it. Second, having some degree of value exchanged between parties, and whether that value is monetary or in the form of some other good or service, that depends on the platform itself. Third, it being scalable, beyond just a small user base, oftentimes beyond markets, beyond just a single geography. And oftentimes it's the internet and the mobile internet that allows them to do so. Fourth, this is very important for sharing economies, and I want to highlight this one because for most of the sharing economies out there, this has been the main point that they've used to sell people on the idea of a sharing economy, and that's utilization of idle assets. If you have a car and you only drive it once per week, then perhaps that's an idle asset that can be better utilized. If you have a home, perhaps you have several homes, then perhaps you can also rent that out to people and also activate and utilize those idle assets. Fifth, peer-to-peer. So a peer-to-peer nature where individuals are connecting to other individuals and sharing value between the two. And then finally, a sense of community. People that want to belong to a community of like-minded people that share ideas and share values. So these are the 6 that we've identified as common characteristics of sharing economies. And we'll go into in just a moment how these different platforms rank and how they can be characterized along those 6 different points. But taking a big step back, the idea of a sharing economy is actually not new. If you go back far enough in human history, back to when people lived in small villages of perhaps only 50 to 100 people, there was already a very strong sense of sharing back then, because people shared a water well. People shared knowledge. Wisdom was carried down from generation to generation, from villager to villager. And protection. Protection was also shared by all the villagers, either by building walls that everyone benefited from, or even more directly, by having the stronger people within the village be able to protect everyone within the village. So that sharing principle was very much alive. Now, as populations scaled, and people no longer lived in just small villages of 50 people, and now people lived in major metropolises, major cities like this, right? And Seoul is very much like this, Shanghai is very much like this, LA, New York. And once you get to this scale, people were less willing to share with their neighbors because they didn't know their neighbors, in fact. They were strangers. And when you get to this size, you're facing a new problem. It's called the free rider problem. So what is the free rider problem? So since people cannot be prevented from enjoying a common good, individuals may end up avoiding contributing or paying in the hopes that others will continue to pay. So why would I pay when I know other people may cheat or may try to circumvent the system? And so this free rider problem prevents private organizations, for example, those that cannot levy a broad tax, from supplying public goods. And it's become much more transactional in nature. Less so of a sharing economy, much more of a conventional economy. So if you remember those 6 characteristics that I went through earlier, that includes an on-demand nature, value exchange, scalability, activation of idle assets, peer-to-peer nature, and sense of community, we can take a look at all these very familiar and well-known sharing economy platforms that are currently quite successful today, and see how they rate across these 6 different characteristics. And interestingly enough, when you first start looking at the on-demand nature, most of these actually do retain that aspect. 2 don't, WeWork and Wikipedia, and for good reason. These platforms actually launched and started out not having a on-demand nature. So that was never their plan, and that's okay. Not all sharing economies necessarily need to be on demand. It just so happens that most of them are. The exchange of value, also across the board for the most part, most of these platforms are still retaining this aspect, except for Wikipedia. And we'll soon see that Wikipedia is a bit of an interesting outlier in several respects. The third one, scalability. Now, across the board, green check marks. That means all of these platforms retain this aspect, this characteristic of a sharing economy, and we'll soon see why. Activation of idle assets. So this is the one that I highlighted as being really important for sharing economies, and it was the reason why sharing economies were so interesting, so intriguing when they first started, because it allowed people to share those resources that they weren't using as much and get compensated for it. It also allowed people to benefit from these idle assets without necessarily having to own it themselves. So a lot of interesting value exchange, a lot of economics and dynamics there. Unfortunately, as you can see on the chart here, very few of these very popular sharing economy platforms actually retain this aspect of activation of vital assets. Now, you may be thinking, well, what about Uber? It seems like that's still very much activation of vital assets. Well, yes and no, because Uber has, in their quest of scaling and becoming such a massive global phenomenon, a global platform, they've also become a financing platform. So for people that don't even own a car, they're now able to go to Uber and get financing for new autos. And these are cars that are certainly not idle assets. They weren't already being purchased. They are now